sealed for the season, stuffed with quilts and old cloths, which is perhaps the oldest known example of a family arguing about insulation. In nearby cisterns, massive domes called Anbar's glacial waters collected and chilled beneath vaulted ceilings, while the badgers above them kept the air moving across the surface, making the entire system function like a passive refrigerator, powered by mountain air and physics textbooks that hadn't been written yet. These inventions weren't confined to Persia alone. Variations of the wind tower concept can be traced across the ancient world, from Egypt to Pakistan, with each culture tweaking the design to suit its climate, humidity, and local gossip. Still, it was the Persians who perfected it, especially during the Islamic Golden Age, when scholars translated Greek and Indian texts, then looked out at their sunburned deserts and said, "Yes, but how do we nap in this heat?" Entire treatises were written on the motion of air and water, and some noble families funded research not into conquest or conquest, but comfort, an idea that might strike you as delightfully civilized. Let us now enter a humble home, circa 950 CE, where a clay lamp flickers in the corner and the family patriarch, wearing a linen tunic stained with ink, gestures proudly at his wind tower while explaining to a curious grandchild how, thanks to nothing more than careful design and a deep understanding of nature, their house remains cooler than the governor's palace. The child falls asleep mid-explanation, which secretly pleases him. It means the system is working. Over time, these towers became a symbol not just of climate control, but of a culture in tune with its environment. Unlike modern buildings, which blast hot or cold air at the flick of a switch and often forget that weather exists outside, Persian architecture asked the environment to participate, to collaborate, to breathe together with its occupants. It's no wonder that, despite their simplicity, badgers became entwined with poetry, appearing in couplets and metaphors about longing, rest, and the soft hand of the divine passing through human life. Even today, in parts of Iran and Afghanistan, the wind towers remain, some restored, others stubbornly standing, despite earthquakes and neglect, each one a gentle sentinel whispering stories to the wind. They tell of camel caravans trudging past, of spice sellers fanning themselves beneath date palms, of sleepy architects who may have nodded off while sketching vent locations by lamplight. And as our quiet walk through this sleepy history continues, we might pause to consider how little we've truly improved upon this ancient system, how our modern cities, built of steel and glass, swelter and freeze with artificial violence, while these clay towers, shaped by necessity and dreamers with sand on their sandals, still offer comfort with no carbon footprint at all. A small family sleeps soundly under woven blankets, listening not to the hum of machines, but the long, slow exhale of wind, guided by walls older than stories. Somewhere beyond the dunes, a desert fox yawns, and above it all, the badger continues to catch the wind just as it always has. Let us begin our slow journey deep in the sweltering heart of ancient India, where elephants once lumbered gently through tree-lined avenues. The scent of neem and jasmine hung thick in the humid air, and the Mauryan Empire, at the height of its glory in the 3rd century BCE, stretched from the Himalayas in the north all the way to the sparkling southern coasts. With the cautious pace of oxen caravans and the measured whisper of scribes chiseling history into stone, amidst this colossal dominion ruled one of history's most quietly surprising figures, Emperor Ashoka, a man whose life would read like a war epic if it hadn't gently meandered into something more like a bedtime story about redemption, rain, rice fields, and royal veterinarians. When we meet Ashoka, he is not yet the sleepy-eyed, vegetarian philosopher king the world would one day associate with peace, dharma, and banyan tree diplomacy instead. He is still the moody prince with a sword, a temper, and a knack for military logistics. His early career was full of sharp angles and conquests, none more infamous than the bloody campaign against the kingdom of Kalinga, battle so devastating, with hills reportedly running red with the blood of slain soldiers and sobbing widows, that it seems, quite frankly, the worst possible prelude to a tale about pet hospitals. But that's precisely the strange twist Ashoka's story takes. For as legend has it, standing amidst the smoldering aftermath of Kalinga's fall, he experienced a profound transformation, not the dramatic sort with lightning and trumpets, but a quiet, crushing realization that the empire he'd won came at the price of unbearable sorrow. What follows is one of history's gentlest pivots, the warrior king turns his attention to peace, welfare, and perhaps most curiously of all, the welfare of animals, setting up the world's earliest known system of veterinary hospitals. Yes, veterinary hospitals for goats, geese, elephants, parrots, cows, and camels. In an era when most rulers were more concerned with hunting animals than healing them, Ashoka's government began deploying medicinal herbs, trained caregivers, and even traveling inspectors whose job it was to ensure the proper treatment of creatures both wild and domesticated. Imagine, if you will, a royal decree being posted on a mangatru-shaded village bulletin board, not about taxes, but about where your injured peacock could receive treatment for a sprained leg. These pashusalas were built with a kind of earnest, bureaucratic compassion, staffed by herbalists, caretakers, and gently overqualified monks who kept journals detailing ailments ranging from cracked hooves to melancholic parrots. Ashoka's edicts, carved onto enormous stone pillars, explicitly mentioned care for animals not only within his empire, but even in neighboring lands. He reportedly sent medicinal plants and healing scrolls as diplomatic gifts, which must have made for some very confused ambassadors who were expecting elephants and gold, but instead received camphor ointments and wound dressings for livestock. One of the more charming quirks of Ashoka's post-Kalinga reign was how he restructured palace gardens to double as wildlife sanctuaries, no longer decorative symbols of royal pride, but peaceful enclosures where deer could nap under fig trees, and macaques could safely practice aerial stunts under the supervision of patient, birdwatching stewards. These efforts weren't just symbolic. The Mauryan bureaucracy issued guidelines on humane slaughter, banned certain forms of animal sacrifice, and in some cases even forbade the castration of working oxen unless deemed medically necessary by a wandering veterinarian with a bamboo stethoscope and a suspiciously sleepy cow at his side. Visitors from Greece and Syria, many of whom arrived expecting riches and military splendor, instead wandered through peaceful groves echoing with the sounds of feeding time and temple bells, not the clamor of conquest, but the slow, rhythmic peace of a government trying its best to be nice to ducks. And while this empire-wide compassion didn't magically erase the complexities of governance, there were still borders to patrol, crops to monitor, and noble families arguing about irrigation canals. It did create an atmosphere where public rest houses, free medical care, and shaded animal shelters became as vital to imperial identity as statues or swords. In fact, Ashoka's concern for animals extended even into metaphysics. According to his Buddhist convictions, kindness to all sentient beings was a moral obligation, and this trickled into everything from how he trained his palace cooks to how he funded schools for monks who taught bird-friendly meditation chants. On long, warm evenings, it's said that Ashoka himself would stroll through the royal gardens barefoot, tossing seeds to pigeons and asking his advisors gently absurd questions, like whether squirrels appreciated mangoes more than bananas, and whether turtle shells could predict monsoon patterns. Some scholars debate how extensive these veterinary hospitals really were. Were they widespread government programs or scattered pilot experiments? But even if half the stories are true, they still offer a remarkable glimpse into a society that dared to ask, what if the strength of an empire wasn't measured by territory, but by how gently it treated the smallest of lives? And so, as we settle in under the tall neem tree of this story, its branches heavy with dusk and soft rain, we can drift off to the imagined sounds of a gentle Mauryan veterinarian humming as he wraps a bandage around a baby goat's leg, or the hushed conversations between camel drivers as they debate which temple compound has the better papaya-fed parrots. Far from the battlefield, Ashoka's true legacy may be the quiet hospital courtyard where a sleepy elephant snoozes beside a pond, undisturbed, attended by caretakers trained not in conquest but in comfort. Let us slip quietly into a dream stitched from olive branches and fermented grapes, a story that unfolds on the Aegean Sea beneath a sky the color of crushed violets, where a ship of unsuspecting pirates bobs gently on silken waves, and among its crew is a half-dozing sailor who will later claim, while sipping lukewarm wine, that this was the day they tried to kidnap a god and ended up as dolphins. It begins as many sleepy tales do in ignorance, with a handful of sunburnt sailors who see a lone, beautiful youth standing on the shoreline of a quiet island, draped in fine purple robes, his hair curled like it belongs in a poem, and a faint perfume of wild thyme and fig clinging to him like a traveling breeze. They don't know it's Dionysus, or perhaps they do, and simply don't care either way. They scoop him up with a plan to sell him somewhere exotic, where fragrant youths in silks fetch a decent price and questions are best avoided. They tie him gently to the mast, more out of formality than fear, and one crewman even offers him a fig, which the youth politely declines, smiling faintly, as if already rehearsing the comedy to come. The ship pushes off from shore, and for a time all is calm. Waves slosh lazily against the hull. Gulls trace lazy spirals above, and Dionysus reclines where he's been bound, humming softly as if conducting the wind itself. Then the oddities begin. A small vine snakes its way up the mast, not fast, just gently curious, almost polite. A cluster of grapes appears, dangling from a fresh green curl. One pirate snickers, another frowns. Then the deck smells of wine. Then it is wine red rich, running in ribbons between the wood planks, as if the ship itself has developed a drinking problem. The ropes around Dionysus fall off with a quiet sigh, and he stands, stretching like a cat in sunlight, while a full-grown leopard materializes beside him and pads across the deck with the confident gait of a creature who knows it's the only thing here with claws. Panic begins in whispers, then spreads in waves. One sailor tries to steer. The rudder melts into ivy. Another reaches for a knife, but it turns to myrrh in his hand. The god merely watches. Somewhere above, doves begin to circle, cooing softly like temple singers. The pirates, in what could generously be called a group decision, leap into the sea, flailing, shrieking, half sobrand. In an instant they are dolphins, sleek and silver, darting joyfully beneath the surface, apparently delighted by their new form. It is, Dionysus will later remark, one of his kinder transformations. He hums again, and the ship rights itself, stripped now of its panicked crew, and bursting with vine leaves and singing frogs. The god turns the prow toward Naxos, sails billowing with wind that seems to rise directly from a grape-scented breeze. On the island, he finds a different sort of tragedy. Ariadne, the princess, abandoned by Theseus, lies sleeping beneath a fig tree, her dress stained with salt and sorrow. Dionysus, always a lover of drama and forgotten things, falls for her instantly. He wakes her not with kisses but with wine and gentle laughter, and when she opens her eyes, she sees not a god but someone who knows the ache of being left behind. He marries her at sunset, the ceremony conducted by satyrs playing flutes and nymphs twirling ribbons of seafoam. He throws her crown into the sky, where it becomes the corona borealis, and for once, a myth ends with mutual affection instead of ironic punishment. But this, too, is just one chapter in a life of strange contradictions. Dionysus is joy and madness, theater and frenzy, the god of masks and real feelings. He wanders far and wide, India, Phrygia, the underworld, collecting odd companions and Adur stories. He teaches kings how to throw better parties and occasionally turns people into vines when they don't RSVP. His followers, the Maenads, dance barefoot through forests under moonlight, wielding thyrsus staffs and dangerously unclear intentions. There are festivals in his name, wild affairs filled with wine, laughter, mistaken identities, and at least one goat play. His temples are often half gardens, half theaters, echoing with hymns and hiccups. He is soft and savage, kind and chaotic, a god who comforts the outcast and confuses the powerful. Unlike the stern gods of law and logic, Dionysus offers surrender, not structure, place to feel too much and be forgiven for it. In Athens, his cult gives birth to tragedy and comedy both, birthing Western theater beneath his vineless altars. Actors begin every performance by invoking him, whispering his name behind masks that look like smiles or sorrow, sometimes both. Somewhere, in a cave lit by flickering oil lamps, an old priestess of Dionysus smiles and pours wine into a basin, watching the ripples carry her whispered prayers toward a god who rarely listens in straight lines but always answers in surprises. And as the night deepens, and this story sways like a ship on a wind-dark sea, we leave our myth with dolphins leaping beneath starlight, a crown glittering in the heavens, and Dionysus reclining once more, perhaps on a hillside, perhaps in your dreams, smiling softly as ivy creeps in through the window. Not all pirates chase gold. Some just end up chasing gods. Let us drift now into a world not ruled by kings or knights or plagues, but by something subtler smells, gently tiptoe through the faint, fragrant haze of the medieval past, where life unfolded in gardens, kitchens, bathhouses, apothecaries, and occasionally less pleasant alleyways, each with its own peculiar perfume guiding daily decisions, stirring memory, and shaping meaning in ways most modern noses have long forgotten. In this slower, more aromatic time when parchment was stretched by hand and beeswax candles flickered in drafty cloister scents weren't just passing sensations, they were signs, omens, instructions, and moral indicators woven into the rhythm of monastic life and market day alike. A whiff of lavender might signal the approach of a well-bathed noble, while the acidic twang of vinegar on the wind told you a plague-warding fumigator was nearby, trundling along with his smoke pot. And solemn warnings, perfume wasn't just a luxury, but a defense against miasma, what physicians of the time believed to be the true cause of illness: bad air thick with spiritual rot, a well-scented orange studded with cloves, a pomander tucked into a woolen pouch, or a nosegay of rue and rosemary. These were your everyday armor against death and discomfort. In monasteries, herbs like sweet basil, thyme, and marjoram were planted not merely for cooking but for calming the spirit, aiding memory, and soothing those in distress. Entire herbal manuals were penned by candlelight, with diagrams lovingly detailing the virtues of angelica root and chamomile steam. And just as some colors were reserved for royalty, certain aromas were thought to belong to the divine: incense of frankincense and myrrh, rising like golden thread during Mass, carrying prayers upward with its curling fingers of smoke. But scent wasn't always sacred. It could condemn as easily as it could comfort. Inquisition records are faintly scented with suspicion, witches were said to reek of sulfur, and saints were said to emit the odor of sanctity at death, a sweet perfume signaling their passage into heaven. A heavenly corpse might smell of roses, while a suspiciously unspoiled one might warrant exhumation. This wasn't metaphor to medieval folk, it was policy. We walk now into a bathhouse in late 13th century Prague, where olive oil is being warmed. For massages, mint leaves are crushed into wash basins, and the soft scent of pine smoke hovers over heated stones. Bath attendants glide barefoot across tiled floors, swaying to music played on a rebec, while nobles and townsfolk alike soak in shared tubs, chatting through aromatic steam. Cleanliness wasn't always moralized, but it was sensual and social, a rheumatic bridge between the sacred and the mundane. Some scents were thought to stimulate the humors, that mysterious quartet of bodily fluids believed to govern mood and health. Musk and cinnamon were considered warming and good for melancholy. Violet and lily cooled the temper and eased longing. Lovers might trade perfumed gloves or lettuce seals steeped in rosewater as tokens, their scents lingering long after the parchment had crinkled. In the kitchens of a minor manor, a cook plucks saffron threads into a bubbling pot while cloves pop beneath her knife. The air is thick with food, but it's more than hunger. It stirs its comfort, class, memory. Spices weren't just for taste, they were conspicuous wealth. Shipped across deserts and seas, stored in tiny locked boxes, and used by the pinch, the grain, the flake. A single misplaced spice could identify a cook, a region, or a guest. On the battlefield, warriors might soak cloths in rose or vinegar to ease the stench of fear, blood, and armor sweat. Knights often wore scented tokens in their breastplates, not just for love, but to mask the odor of war. And in the plague years, when the world seemed to dim under a fog of grief, the olfactory landscape grew ever more intense. Streets were lined with burning pitch, homes were fumigated with laurel smoke, and masks shaped like birds held scented herbs inside their beaks. Even the language changed. Poets used fragrant to mean beautiful, or moral, or noble. Odor became metaphor. A king's generosity was perfumed across the land, while a traitor reeked of deceit. In dreams and visions, saints spoke through scent. One nun, upon smelling strawberries in winter, declared it a sign that heaven was nearby. And so we follow this language of aroma through the halls of power, past sickbeds and rose gardens, into alchemists' dens where ambergris is stirred into warm wax and bees circle lazily overhead. In Paris, spice merchants hawk nutmeg like gold. In Cairo, a perfumer dips silk into distilled sandalwood. In Norwich, a washerwoman adds a single sprig of lavender to the rinse tub, just because it makes her sigh. Even now, centuries later, a walk through an old herb garden, basil, sage, mint, fennel, can transport us to the quiet moments of medieval life. A boy sniffing thyme to calm his nerves before grammar lessons, an abbot inhaling lavender before delivering a homily, a widow pressing rose petals between the pages of a psalter to remember someone lost. For them, the world was not just seen or heard, it was smelled, every day, in layers of meaning. And so, as you drift off now, wrapped in this slow blanket of old world scents, imagine a world where illness smelled like apples, love like nutmeg, heaven like roses, and safety like freshly crushed marjoram on a sun-warmed sill. Let us drift gently now, far from the clatter of modern cities, and back into the sun-dappled heart of the Valley of Mexico, where great lakes once shimmered like polished obsidian under wide skies, and where, in the floating city of Tenochtitlan of the mighty Aztec Empire, quiet hands tended gardens that didn't sit on land, but on water, like green quilts stitched to the surface of a dream. These were the chinampas, often called floating gardens, but they were not boats, nor were they magical, just marvels of engineering and patience. Wide rectangles of fertile earth woven into shallow lake beds with bundles of reeds and layers of mud, compost, and wisdom passed down on calloused fingers. Aztec gardeners, or Tlaxpanth, rose with the dawn, greeted by herons skimming low across the morning mist, and gently poled their wooden canoes between narrow canals to reach their plots. They wore simple cotton tunics and straw hats, their tools few and familiar, a digging stick, a woven basket, and an instinctive understanding of when the maize was thirsty or the amaranth jealous. They did not garden for beauty, though the gardens were beautiful. They gardened for maize and beans, for squash and chili, for tomato and marigold, all arranged in quiet rows that listened to the wind and rustled when no one was speaking. Occasionally, a gardener might pause to sip from a gourd of chocolate-flavored atole, or chat with a passing fisherman about the weather, which was not just a daily concern, but a political one. As weather gods had moods and preferences, the gardeners often offered a few drops of water or a whisper of song to Tlaloc, god of rain, in hopes that his jaguar-faced messengers would remember this tiny chinampa next time the clouds gathered. Some gardens were handed down through generations, like heirlooms, marked by particular rows of blue maize or white flowers grown only for temple rituals. And in this world of soft paddling and warm sunlight, productivity and reverence grew side by side. Birds fluttered across cornflowers, dragonflies hovered like tiny scribes recording irrigation plans, and somewhere nearby, a priest collected herbs for a ceremony while debating whether the moon's current shape required a different variety of copal. Aztec society, with its warriors, scribes, priests, and astronomers, was balanced precariously on the quiet brilliance of these gardeners, whose chinampas fed the capital's 100,000 mouths without fanfare or parade. And it wasn't just food. These green plots also produced medicinal plants like ipasot, tessachitl, and chalcochinoli, each with a purpose that might sound half magical to modern ears: banishing ghosts from the stomach, calming the heart, sharpening dreams. Apprentices, often children no older than 10, learned how to spot a thirsty pepper plant by its scent, how to anchor a new chinampa with willow stakes, and how to predict rainfall by the way certain ants behaved on canal edges. Their knowledge wasn't written in books, but carried in lullabies and work songs, some of which still echo, faintly, in Nahuatl verses, spoken only by elders and wind. And when the emperor himself dined, perhaps reclining on a mat, shaded by parrot-feathered awnings, the feast set before him quinoa in chili honey sauce, maize dumplings wrapped in avocado leaves, a handful of floating marigold petals owed everything to the humble hands now, pulling weeds beside a canoe. Gardeners had a special place in Aztec cosmology too. They weren't warriors, but they fought decay and drought with daily devotion. They weren't priests, but their work fed the gods through temple offerings. They weren't orators, but their fingers spoke with the soil, and the soil always replied. In the rainy season, chinampas grew heavy with squash vines and sun-warmed chilies, and children would run barefoot along their grassy banks, startling birds and losing woven hats in the breeze. During the dry season, extra mud was dug from canals and packed onto beds, a process involving more laughter and singing than most armies ever knew. Festivals often celebrated the fruits of these efforts: parades of food wrapped in maize husks, dancers masked as frogs and hummingbirds, and songs sung to deities of abundance, whose altars glittered with seeds, petals, and obsidian. Occasionally, an imperial inspector might arrive quietly, sternly recording how many chilies each plot had produced. But even he would pause at the sight of a frog lounging on a lily pad, or a grandmother instructing her grandson on the ideal way to tie maize stalks against the wind. Time passed differently here. Even in the shadow of pyramids and conquest, the world on water moved slowly, nourished by patience and ritual. And now, as we drift lazily beside these green islands, we notice how the sounds begin to blend: the splash of an oar, the buzz of bees, the high whistle of a bird greeting the sun, and the soft hum of Nahuatl syllables carried across the water like lullabies for the land. The chinampas may seem like a footnote in the vast empire of the Aztecs, but they are, in fact, its quiet heart, a living mosaic of memory and cultivation that continues, in corners, even now. Somewhere, in a canal outside of Xochimilco, a gardener still hums an old tune while planting amaranth in the early light. And if you listen closely, if you let yourself float between then and now, the garden welcomes you not as a guest, but as someone who remembers. Let us drift gently now, far from the clatter of modern cities, and back into the sun-dappled heart of the Valley of Mexico, where great lakes once shimmered like polished obsidian under wide skies, and where, in the floating city of Tenochtitlan of the mighty Aztec Empire, quiet hands tended gardens that didn't sit on land, but on water, like green quilts stitched to the surface of a dream. These were the chinampas, often called floating gardens, but they were not boats, nor were they magical just marvels of engineering and patience. Wide rectangles of fertile earth woven into shallow lake beds with bundles of reeds and layers of mud, compost, and wisdom passed down on calloused fingers. Aztec gardeners, or Tlaxpanth, rose with the dawn, greeted by herons skimming low across the morning mist, and gently poled their wooden canoes between narrow canals to reach their plots. They wore simple cotton tunics and straw hats, their tools few and familiar: a digging stick, a woven basket, and an instinctive understanding of when the maize was thirsty or the amaranth jealous. They did not garden for beauty, though the gardens were beautiful. They gardened for maize and beans, for squash and chili, for tomato and marigold, all arranged in quiet rows that listened to the wind and rustled when no one was speaking. Occasionally, a gardener might pause to sip from a gourd of chocolate-flavored atole, or chat with a passing fisherman about the weather, which was not just a daily concern, but a political one. As weather gods had moods and preferences, the gardeners often offered a few drops of water or a whisper of song to Tlaloc, god of rain, in hopes that his jaguar-faced messengers would remember this tiny chinampa next time the clouds gathered. Some gardens were handed down through generations, like heirlooms, marked by particular rows of blue maize or white flowers grown only for temple rituals. And in this world of soft paddling and warm sunlight, productivity and reverence grew side by side. Birds fluttered across cornflowers, dragonflies hovered like tiny scribes recording irrigation plans, and somewhere nearby, a priest collected herbs for a ceremony while debating whether the moon's current shape required a different variety of copal. Aztec society, with its warriors, scribes, priests, and astronomers, was balanced precariously on the quiet brilliance of these gardeners, whose chinampas fed the capital's 100,000 mouths without fanfare or parade. And it wasn't just food. These green plots also produced medicinal plants like ipasot, tessachitl, and chalcochinoli, each with a purpose that might sound half magical to modern ears: banishing ghosts from the stomach, calming the heart, sharpening dreams. Apprentices, often children no older than 10, learned how to spot a thirsty pepper plant by its scent, how to anchor a new chinampa with willow stakes, and how to predict rainfall by the way certain ants behaved on canal edges. Their knowledge